The Toronto Raptors are in their final preparations for summer training camp, but if this report is true, then it could shake everything up. Let's get into it. There were many needs for the Raptors front office to address about the roster in the offseason, and one of the needs definitely was finding a rim-protecting big to back up Jakob Poeltl. Obviously, there are backup bigs already on the team, like Kelly Olynyk, who is going to get a good amount of play time, like potentially Jonathan Mobo, who may get some minutes here and there this season. But what we noticed last season the team was lacking, and still is lacking going into the season, is a backup center who can protect the rim. And it's very clear that the Raptors have wanted to address this issue. Perhaps their priorities laid elsewhere earlier on in the offseason, mainly addressing the very big need for a backup point guard by acquiring Davion Mitchell in a trade, and also the 45th overall pick in that same trade, which was eventually used on another person who could challenge for that backup point guard position in Jamal Shead. But at least there is an understanding here from the Raptors that they need to find some sort of rim protection to come off the bench. It was apparent that they were looking for something like this when they signed free agent center Bruno Fernando. We talked about Bruno Fernando in a video last week, and what was curious about Bruno Fernando's contract situation was that he signed essentially a training camp deal. He signed a contract that was guaranteed through training camp, but the contract would become fully guaranteed if he was on the Raptors roster for the first game of the season, full stop. There's no partial guarantee. There's no half of a year guarantee. If he makes the roster, it's fully guaranteed. If he doesn't make the roster, he's cut, and he doesn't get any of that additional money. So I thought that was a bit of a curious situation because it's not very common for a contract to turn out like that. And I was wondering if there were some other things that were on the mind of the front office of the Raptors, especially in the camp of Christian Koloko, who we also spoke about in a video last week where we talked about Christian Koloko potentially preparing himself for a return to the NBA. We know that the blood clot issue has been ongoing, and it's the reason the Toronto Raptors unfortunately had to waive the player midway through last season to make roster spots available for a Pascal Siakam trade to come to fruition and to potentially see what they had with some other roster players for the rest of the season that they maybe want to try out in the summer and maybe want to try out into this season as well. But the big picture news was that Christian Koloko was starting his return to basketball. He was cleared to return to play basketball, but he has not yet been cleared to play in the NBA. But according to this report, that could change. The latest update that we have from Christian Koloko's agent is that there was a major breakthrough in the last few months, and there was surgery done, and Koloko has been recovering extremely well. Another test is going to come in now what's going to be a week's time, and if everything is clear, he is all good to return to play. Some other reports that came out after this news article was that Christian Koloko is expected to be back and ready for the new NBA season. So now we have some more evidence as to what the thoughts are of the Raptors front office with this Bruno Fernando contract and how it's linked to the Christian Koloko situation, because there's been a number of teams that have been monitoring Christian Koloko, and we've had articles over the last few months suggesting that the Toronto Raptors have continued to, quote, keep tabs on Koloko. And there was definitely proof of this when we saw Christian Koloko with the Toronto Raptors staff and with some Toronto Raptors players at the most recent Las Vegas Summer League. The Toronto Raptors knew about the potential of Christian Koloko coming back to the NBA and the greater potential, potentially, of him coming back to the NBA and signing for the Raptors. Now, we preface all this by saying that the big news of this, the big story from all this, is that it'd be absolutely fantastic if Christian Koloko could return to professional basketball in any capacity, whether or not it's with the Raptors. His health is the biggest thing right now. And if he is cleared to play, that's fantastic for a budding young NBA player who has serious potential to be a really decent caliber center in this league. That is, first and foremost, the biggest and most important thing. But if he does return to the league, it certainly would be great if he did sign with the Raptors. And this is on their mind with this Bruno Fernando contract. This is how they link. The Raptors have an understanding that there's already a good amount of centers on the team, but they don't have that rim-protecting center. So what they're likely thinking with this curious Bruno Fernando contract of only signing on a training camp deal is if the Raptors don't get Christian Koloko, if he's not cleared to play, if he decides to sign with another team, they're going to go with Bruno Fernando. But if Christian Koloko is cleared to return to basketball and the Raptors have these 2 roster spots remaining, potentially saving one of those for Koloko, and he does decide to sign with the team, then they will likely go with Christian Koloko as that backup rim protecting player that I was specifying that is needed on this roster, and waive Bruno Fernando. And what's great is that none of that Bruno Fernando money is really guaranteed over the season, so they can wipe their hands clean. So the decision will come down to Christian Koloko or Bruno Fernando. And honestly, I said in the last video that I'm a decent fan of Bruno Fernando, and I would like to see what he can do potentially for the Raptors roster. If he does make it, what sort of role he could have. Not asking for the world, but 10, 11, 12 minutes per game, providing nice, solid anchoring on the defensive end of the floor with a little bit of switchability. Well, that's exactly what the Raptors had in mind when they selected Christian Koloko with the 33rd overall pick in the 2022 NBA entry draft. So all of the traits that they're looking for, all of the traits that they've highlighted with Bruno Fernando, highlighted as being the reason that they wanted to sign him, Christian Koloko just provides a higher degree of ability in pretty much all those categories for me, and I feel as though the Raptors would feel the same way. So what are the options right now? Well, there's still about a week to go before we get some sort of results from Christian Koloko's blood clot issue. But again, his agent has specified that if it's all clear, everything is fine, and pretty much he'll be ready to play. But the newest reports are saying, once again, that Christian Koloko is expected to return to NBA basketball and is expected to return ahead of the upcoming NBA season. And if he does do so, the Raptors have been in contact. Hopefully, there's some sort of deal that can be put in place to bring him back to the league. I think a number of teams are going to be interested in the player. Perhaps a number of teams have already solidified their roster going into the upcoming training camp, have already solidified who they want to work with for the upcoming season, and maybe aren't putting as much of thought into Koloko as the Raptors are. But it's very evident to me with Koloko's presence with the Raptors at NBA events, with the articles coming out that the Raptors are continuing to keep tabs on the player, and with this Bruno Fernando contract situation, it is very clear to me that the Raptors not only believe Koloko will come back, I think that it's starting to look like there's an expectation that he will come back. And based on all this evidence, I would say that my expectation is that Koloko does come back and does return to the Toronto Raptors. That means probably Bruno Fernando's stay is going to be a very short one with the Raptors, but that's just the business here. If Koloko comes back, I'd be over the moon. First of all, for himself, but even more so if he does return and come back to the Raptors. He is the exact type of player this roster needs right now. So what do you make of this whole situation? Do you agree with my sentiments? Give me all of your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, because that's it for today's video. Drop a like if you did enjoy. Make sure you're subscribed to Amateur Sports for more Raptors content, and I will see you again next time for another video.